A slow evening along the Nile. The heat of the day was finally beginning to loosen its grip on the land. Along the banks of the Nile, the air felt softer than it had at noon. The river moved quietly through the fading light, carrying reflections of mud-brick homes, palm trees, and small fishing boats tied near the shore. For many people in ancient Egypt, sunset was not the end of activity, but it was the beginning of relief. The hardest hours of labor were usually behind them. Farmers had spent the day in the fields, scribes had bent over papyrus scrolls, fishermen had worked their nets, and builders had carried heavy stone under the blazing sun. As darkness approached, the world became gentler. Smoke drifted upward from cooking fires. The smell of bread and onions floated through narrow streets. Children who had spent the day helping with chores played quietly near their homes. Older people sat outside to catch the evening breeze. Ancient Egypt was a land shaped by the rhythm of the Nile. The river brought water, food, transportation, and life itself. But it also shaped the rhythm of work and rest. People rose early to avoid the worst heat, and many looked forward to the cool hours after sunset. These evening moments were often simple. They were not filled with entertainment as we might imagine today. Instead, relaxation came through familiar routines, family company, food, music, and the comfort of cooler air. As the sky darkened, oil lamps began to glow inside homes. Their light was soft and uneven, creating warm pools of brightness against mud-plastered walls. Outside, the stars slowly appeared above the desert. The night sky over Egypt was often clear, and many people knew the movements of the stars well. In villages near the Nile, evenings could feel peaceful despite the noise of daily life. Donkeys brayed in the distance. Water splashed against riverbanks. Voices drifted through open doorways. Yet compared with the harsh brightness and constant labor of daytime, the evening brought a sense of release. For ordinary workers, relaxation often meant simply sitting down. After hours of physical labor, resting tired legs was a pleasure in itself. A farmer might sit on a low stool outside his home while eating a simple meal of bread, vegetables, and perhaps fish if the family had been fortunate that day. Nearby, relatives might talk quietly about the harvest, the river level, or plans for the next morning. Women who had spent the day grinding grain, baking bread, carrying water, and caring for children also experienced this slower rhythm. Evening tasks still remained, but they could often be done in cooler air. Conversations became easier when the heat faded. The wealthy enjoyed more comforts, but even their evenings shared some similarities with those of common people. Large houses had courtyards where family members could sit together. Servants brought food and drink. Musicians might play soft melodies on harps or flutes. Perfumed oils and incense created pleasant scents. Yet the basic desire was the same, to escape the heat and enjoy the calm of night. Along the river, fishermen sometimes stayed awake after sunset. The Nile did not sleep, and fishing could continue in the cooler darkness. Lantern light flickered on the water as small boats drifted quietly. The sounds were gentle: the creak of wood, the splash of a paddle, the murmur of voices. In towns and cities, merchants closed their stalls as daylight faded. Dust settled onto streets that had been busy all afternoon. Workers returned home carrying tools, baskets, or bundles of goods. The pace of life slowed naturally with the setting sun. Many Egyptians found comfort in routine. Evening rituals changed little from day to day. Meals were shared. Lamps were lit. Doors were secured. Beds were prepared. The predictability itself may have felt relaxing. After a long day of effort, familiar habits offered a sense of stability. Religion also played a role in evening life. Small household shrines could be tended at night. Offerings might be made to protective gods and ancestors. Prayers were often simple requests for health, safety, and a peaceful night. As darkness deepened, the temperature continued to fall. The desert released the heat it had stored during the day. People who had spent hours sweating under the sun could finally breathe comfortably. Many likely lingered outdoors longer than they did during daylight, enjoying the rare coolness. Some homes had flat roofs where families could gather in the evening. Roofs caught breezes that did not always reach the crowded streets below. People sat together, talked quietly, and looked out over the sleeping town. Children listened to stories while adults watched the stars. The night sky itself was a source of wonder. Without modern lights, the stars appeared bright and numerous. Egyptians studied them for religious, agricultural, and practical reasons. For ordinary people, the stars also provided beauty during the quiet hours after sunset. Even in busy places, there was often a moment when the noise softened. The river kept flowing, insects sang in the darkness, and distant voices became fewer. In those moments, ancient Egypt could feel surprisingly peaceful. The long day behind them. To understand why evening relaxation mattered so much, it helps to imagine the day that came before it. Most Egyptians worked hard from early morning. The climate made labor challenging, especially during the hottest months. Farmers often rose before sunrise. They walked to fields carrying tools over dusty paths depending on the season. They planted crops, repaired irrigation channels, harvested grain, or tended animals. The work was repetitive and physically demanding. Builders faced even heavier labor. They hauled stone, mixed mud, lifted materials, and worked under intense sunlight. Their bodies grew tired quickly. By evening, simply washing dust from their skin and sitting in the shade could feel deeply comforting. Scribes worked in different conditions, but their days were also demanding. They spent hours writing, calculating, and recording information. Their backs and necks ached from long periods of concentration. When evening arrived, they too sought relief. Women's work rarely ended completely. Grain had to be ground, bread baked, water carried, clothing repaired, and children cared for. Yet even these tasks became less exhausting when the air cooled. The contrast between day and night shaped Egyptian life. Daytime was often bright, hot, noisy, and busy. Evening brought softer light, cooler temperatures, slower movement, and more opportunity for conversation. After returning home, many people washed with water stored in jars or brought from the river. Cleanliness was important in Egyptian culture. Dust and sweat collected quickly during the day, and washing before the evening meal was a welcome relief. Meals were usually simple for ordinary families. Bread formed the center of the diet. It was often accompanied by onions, garlic, beans, lentils, dates, figs, or fish. Beer was common and safer to drink than untreated water in many situations. The evening meal was not only about food, it was also a time to gather together. Imagine a small mud brick house near the Nile. A family sits close to an oil lamp. The father returns from the fields with tired shoulders. The mother finishes baking bread. Children settle down after helping with chores. Outside, the sounds of the village grow quieter. Inside, the family shares food and conversation. No one is rushing. For wealthier households, evenings could include music, games, and social visits. Guests might arrive after the heat of the day had passed. Harp players, flutists, and singers entertained the gathering. Servants brought wine, beer, fruit, and prepared dishes. Fragrant oils were applied to the skin, and incense burned in the background. Yet even these more luxurious scenes remained connected to the same environmental reality. People preferred to gather when the temperature became comfortable. The cool evening air encouraged relaxation. Many Egyptians also enjoyed outdoor spaces after sunset. Courtyards, gardens, and rooftops became pleasant places to sit. Palm leaves rustled softly in the breeze. Water features in larger homes added gentle sounds that masked the noise of nearby streets. Children often stayed awake later than they might have during the hottest part of the day. They played, listened to stories, or simply sat with their families. Elders shared memories and advice. Oral storytelling was an important form of entertainment and cultural connection. As the night deepened, lamps flickered against walls decorated with simple paintings or woven mats. Shadows moved slowly across rooms. The atmosphere became quieter and more intimate than the bright bustle of daytime. For many people, relaxation did not require special activities. The absence of labor was enough. Sitting still, eating slowly, talking with family, feeling a cool breeze, and listening to the river could create a deep sense of comfort after a demanding day. Music, stories, and gentle evenings. One of the most soothing ways ancient Egyptians relaxed after sunset was through music. Music was present in temples, festivals, homes, and gatherings. It could be lively, but in quieter evening settings it was often gentle and flowing. Simple instruments such as flutes, harps, and small percussion instruments were common. A harpist might play slow melodies while listeners sat nearby. The sound carried softly through courtyards and open windows. In wealthier homes, trained musicians performed for guests, but music also existed in more modest settings. Singing was part of everyday life. People sang while working, celebrating, mourning, and relaxing. Evening songs may have helped mark the transition from labor to rest. The human voice drifting through the warm night air would have been a familiar sound along the Nile. Storytelling was another important form of evening relaxation. Without books available to most people, stories traveled through conversation. Families gathered after supper to hear tales of gods, heroes, clever travelers, and ordinary people. Some stories were entertaining, while others carried lessons about honesty, loyalty, or wisdom. Children listened closely as elders spoke. The flicker of lamplight made the stories feel vivid. Outside, the darkness of the desert and the river added a sense of mystery without needing dramatic excitement. Games also appeared in evening life. The board game Senet was especially popular. Players moved pieces across a decorated board according to the throw of casting sticks or knuckle bones. The game had both recreational and symbolic meaning, but for many people it was simply an enjoyable way to pass time. Imagine a small group sitting on a rooftop under the stars. A lamp glows nearby. One person plays a flute. Another tells a familiar story. Children lean against their parents, growing sleepy. The air is cooler now, and the long day feels distant. Relaxation could also come from simple observation. People watched the river, listened to insects, or studied the stars. The night sky over Egypt was remarkably clear, and many families spent time outdoors before sleeping. In larger towns, social visits were common after sunset. Friends and relatives walked through narrow streets to share food, conversation, and music. These visits strengthened community ties and provided a welcome break from daily responsibilities. For those living near the Nile, the river itself offered calm. Boats moved slowly through the darkness, and moonlight reflected on the water. The gentle movement of the river created a constant background rhythm that many people associated with peace and stability. Even the sense of evening contributed to relaxation. Cooking fires produced warm smells of bread and roasted foods. Gardens released the fragrance of flowers and herbs. Wealthier households burned incense made from imported resins, filling rooms with sweet smoke. As hours passed, conversations became quieter. Lamps burned lower. Children were carried to bed. Guests departed. The city or village gradually settled into silence, broken only by occasional voices, barking dogs, and the distant sounds of the river. For ancient Egyptians, relaxation after sunset was rarely about escaping life. It was about returning to its slower rhythm. Music, stories, family, food, and the cool night air helped people recover from the demands of the day and prepare for the next sunrise. Preparing for sleep. As the night grew deeper, ancient Egyptian households began preparing for sleep. This transition happened gradually. Lamps were adjusted or extinguished, tools were put away, and the remaining warmth of the day faded from walls and floors. Most homes were built from mud brick, a material that helped moderate temperature. During the hottest months, people often slept in places where air could move freely. Courtyards, rooftops, and shaded outdoor areas were common sleeping spaces when conditions allowed. Bedding was usually simple. Many people slept on woven mats, low wooden beds, or padded surfaces made from reeds and textiles. Wealthier individuals might have more elaborate furniture, but comfort remained closely connected to airflow and coolness rather than softness alone. Before sleeping, families completed small routines. Animals were secured, food was stored, and water jars were covered. Parents checked on children. Household shrines might receive a final prayer for protection during the night. The sounds of ancient Egyptian night were different from the sounds of modern cities. There were no engines, electric lights, or constant machinery. Instead, people heard insects, frogs near the water, distant footsteps, quiet conversations, and the steady movement of the Nile. On rooftops, families sometimes lingered before sleeping. The stars stretched across the sky in extraordinary detail. The Milky Way appeared as a pale band of light. Warm breezes carried the scent of river water and distant vegetation. Sleep itself was highly valued. After days filled with physical labor, rest was necessary for survival and productivity. Farmers needed strength for the next morning's work. Builders needed recovery for tired muscles. Women managing households needed energy for another demanding day. Imagine a village beside the Nile long after sunset. Most lamps have gone dark. A few faint lights remain in doorways. Boats are tied along the shore. The river reflects moonlight in broken silver lines. Somewhere a dog barks once and then becomes quiet. Families settle onto mats and beds while the cool night air moves gently through the town. For many Egyptians, this peaceful end to the day may have been the most relaxing moment of all. The heat had passed. Work was finished. Food had been shared. Children were asleep. The river continued its quiet journey through the darkness, and the ancient world rested beneath the stars. The rhythm would begin again at dawn. Farmers would return to the fields, scribes to their records, fishermen to their boats, and merchants to their stalls. But for these nighttime hours, Egypt belonged to stillness, cool air, and the simple comfort of rest after a long day beside the Nile. The night settled more deeply across the Nile Valley. The last traces of evening conversation slowly faded from the narrow streets. A few lamps still glowed behind doorways, their small flames dancing gently whenever a breeze slipped through a window or open courtyard. Most families had already settled into sleep, but the ancient world was never completely silent. The river continued its endless journey. Water brushed softly against reeds growing along the shore. Small waves tapped against wooden boats resting for the night. Somewhere in the darkness, a fisherman adjusted a rope or checked a net before finally returning home. The sound carried briefly across the water before disappearing again into the stillness. For those sleeping on rooftops, the sky felt impossibly large. Ancient Egyptians lived beneath one of the clearest night skies on earth. Far from modern lights, countless stars filled the darkness. Some appeared bright and steady. Others shimmered softly above the distant desert horizon. Many people knew these stars well. Farmers paid attention to them. Sailors used them for guidance. Priests studied them carefully. Yet ordinary people also spent time simply looking upward. After a day spent focused on fields, workshops, kitchens, and markets, the night sky offered something peaceful and unchanging. A child lying beside parents on a rooftop might stare upward until sleep arrived. The stars seemed endless. Warm stone beneath the sleeping mat slowly released the heat gathered during daylight. The air felt cooler now. A gentle breeze moved through nearby palm leaves. Sleep came gradually. In many homes, several generations lived together. Grandparents, parents, children, and relatives shared limited space. During daylight, these homes could feel crowded. At night, however, everyone grew quiet. The busy movement of the day disappeared. The simple sounds of breathing filled the darkness. Somewhere nearby, a baby stirred. A mother woke briefly, adjusted a blanket, whispered softly, and then settled once more. Across Egypt, thousands of similar moments unfolded at the same time. In farming villages, families rested after long hours spent managing crops. In river communities, fishermen recovered from hauling nets. In larger towns, merchants slept after busy days of trade. In administrative centers, scribes finally rested tired eyes after hours of reading and writing. Though their work differed, evening relaxation often brought everyone to the same destination: stillness. The coolness of night was a gift in ancient Egypt. The daytime sun could be relentless. During the hottest seasons, the heat pressed down upon roads, houses, and fields for many hours. Workers sweated constantly. Dust clung to skin. Muscles ached beneath the weight of labor. Night changed everything. The desert released its stored warmth slowly into the air. Temperatures became more comfortable. Breathing felt easier. Movement required less effort. Many Egyptians probably looked forward to these hours all day. As midnight approached, the villages became quieter still. Only a handful of people remained awake. Night watchmen sometimes moved through larger settlements. Their responsibilities varied, but protecting property and maintaining order were important tasks. They walked slowly through dark streets carrying simple lamps. Their footsteps echoed softly against stone and packed earth. Temple workers occasionally remained active as well. Egyptian religion followed daily cycles connected to both the sun and the gods. Some rituals continued after dark. Within temple walls, priests tended sacred spaces illuminated by flickering light. Yet even these activities unfolded within the calm atmosphere of night. Nothing moved quickly. The darkness encouraged patience. Meanwhile, beyond the cultivated land, the desert stretched endlessly beneath the stars. Sand dunes and rocky hills rested in complete silence. The daytime heat that had shimmered across their surfaces was gone. Cool air drifted over the landscape. From a distance, Egypt's settlements appeared as small islands of life surrounded by vast darkness. Most people rarely traveled far into the desert, yet its presence shaped daily life. It marked the boundaries of fertile land. It reminded people where survival became difficult. And at night, its quietness seemed to deepen the calm of the river valley. Hours passed. The moon climbed higher. Its pale light touched temple walls, palm groves, and riverbanks. Shadows shifted slowly across rooftops where families slept. Inside homes, dreams unfolded. Some dreamers may have imagined successful harvests. Others thought of family members, river journeys, or familiar tasks awaiting them in the morning. Ancient Egyptians often viewed dreams as meaningful experiences. Certain dreams were believed to carry messages or signs. Yet for most people, sleep itself was the true blessing. Rest restored the body. Without it, another day of labor would be difficult. As the deepest part of night arrived, Egypt seemed suspended between yesterday and tomorrow. The fields rested. The workshops rested. The boats rested. Even the animals grew quiet. Only the Nile remained constantly awake. Its waters flowed steadily beneath the moonlight just as they had for thousands of years. And while people slept, the river continued carrying life through the heart of the land. Long before the first light of dawn appeared, some Egyptians began to stir. These early risers were often people whose work depended upon the coolest hours of the day. A fisherman might wake before sunrise. A baker might rise while the stars were still visible. A servant in a wealthy household could begin preparing for the morning long before others opened their eyes. Yet even these workers experienced a peaceful transition from night to day. The world remained mostly dark. The air felt fresh. Silence still lingered over the river valley. Imagine a baker stepping outside a modest home. The village remains asleep. Only a few lamps burn in the distance. Sandals scrape softly across packed earth as he walks toward a communal oven. Above him, the stars continue shining. Around him, the cool air carries the scent of damp riverbanks and mud brick walls that have finally lost the day's heat. For a few precious moments, work has not fully begun. The day waits quietly beyond the horizon. This peaceful period between deep night and sunrise was often one of the calmest times in ancient Egypt. Birds had not yet begun singing. Children still slept. Markets remained closed. The Nile flowed in near silence. Many Egyptians likely appreciated these moments even if they never spoke about them. Life contained endless responsibilities. Fields needed attention. Animals required care. Food had to be prepared. Buildings demanded maintenance. Records needed writing. Yet before sunrise, there existed a brief pause. A moment when the world seemed balanced and still. Back in the sleeping homes, many families remained deeply asleep. Children sprawled across woven mats. Parents rested after demanding days of labor. Grandparents slept nearby. The household, so active during daylight, appeared peaceful and motionless. Oil lamps had burned out hours earlier. Only moonlight entered through openings in walls or courtyards. The coolness of night wrapped around the sleeping village. For those fortunate enough to sleep comfortably, these hours offered valuable recovery. Physical labor shaped nearly every aspect of life. Farming required strength. Construction demanded endurance. Even household chores involved carrying water, grinding grain, lifting supplies, and standing for long periods. Rest was not a luxury. It was essential. Ancient Egyptians understood this through daily experience rather than theory. A well-rested body worked better. A tired body struggled. The cycle repeated day after day, season after season. As the horizon slowly began to brighten, the first hints of morning appeared. The stars faded one by one. Dark blue skies softened toward gray. Palm trees emerged as silhouettes against the growing light. Soon birds would begin calling from riverbanks and gardens. Soon doors would open. Soon smoke would rise from ovens. Soon another busy day would begin. But for now, the final moments of night remained. The Nile still reflected the fading moon. The villages still rested. The desert still held its silence. And in these quiet moments, it becomes easier to understand why evenings and nights were so treasured. They offered something increasingly rare during daylight hours. They offered relief. Not through luxury. Not through grand entertainment. But through cool air, familiar company, simple meals, quiet stories, gentle music, and the comforting knowledge that the day's work was finally complete. The people of ancient Egypt lived demanding lives. Yet each sunset brought a familiar promise. The heat would ease. The river would grow calm. Families would gather. Lamps would glow softly. Voices would become quieter. And beneath the endless stars above the Nile, tired workers would once again find rest. The first light of morning slowly spread across the eastern horizon. For a brief time, the world seemed caught between night and day. The stars faded gently. The moon grew pale. A soft gray light touched the tops of palm trees and the quiet surface of the Nile. Many people were still asleep. The coolest hours of the entire day often arrived just before sunrise. A faint breeze moved through village streets. It slipped over rooftops where families rested beneath simple coverings. It passed through courtyards and open windows, carrying with it the scent of river water and damp earth. For those who had spent the previous evening relaxing after sunset, sleep had offered a temporary escape from the demands of life. Now another day approached. But before labor returned, there remained a few moments of stillness. A fisherman sleeping beside his boat opened his eyes. For a while he simply listened. The river lapped softly against wood. A distant bird called from the reeds. Nothing else moved. The village behind him remained quiet. He sat up slowly and stretched muscles that had worked hard the day before. His hands were rough from years of handling nets and rope. His shoulders carried the memory of countless journeys across the water. Yet in this calm hour, even tired muscles seemed lighter. Nearby, a farmer stirred on a rooftop sleeping space. The stone beneath him had cooled during the night. He sat quietly for a few moments, looking toward the river. Soon he would return to the fields. Soon he would carry tools, inspect irrigation channels, and work beneath the strengthening sun. But not yet. For now, he simply watched the dawn. Ancient Egyptians lived closely connected to natural rhythms. There were no clocks marking every minute. Instead, people followed the movement of the sun, the seasons of the Nile, and the changing patterns of the sky. This close relationship with nature influenced how they rested. Evening relaxation was not separated from the world around them. The cooling air, the fading sunlight, the appearance of stars, and the quiet sounds of night all became part of the experience. As the sky brightened further, activity slowly returned. Doors opened. People stepped outside. Water jars were lifted. Animals were fed. The smell of fresh bread began drifting through the streets. Yet many Egyptians likely carried some of the calmness of the previous evening into the new day. The memory of family conversations. The comfort of shared meals. The peaceful sight of moonlight on the Nile. The feeling of a cool breeze after hours of heat. These simple experiences helped balance the demands of daily life. For ordinary people, relaxation did not require special occasions. It was woven into familiar routines. A quiet meal. A conversation beneath the stars. A few moments sitting beside the river. Listening to music after work. Watching children play while the air cooled. These small pleasures returned again and again throughout life. In some ways, they became more meaningful because they were repeated so often. The same river flowed past. The same stars appeared overhead. The same evening breeze arrived after sunset. Day after day. Year after year. Generation after generation. As the morning continued, villages became busy once more. Farmers walked toward their fields. Fishermen prepared their boats. Craftsmen opened workshops. Scribes gathered writing materials. The calm of night gradually gave way to the rhythm of labor. Yet evening was never very far away. Everyone knew that after the long hours of work, the sun would eventually sink once more toward the western horizon. The heat would soften. The shadows would lengthen. Families would return home. And another period of rest would begin. As the sun climbed higher, memories of the previous evening seemed distant. The river sparkled beneath growing daylight. Dust rose from busy roads. Voices echoed through marketplaces. The ancient world was awake again. In a village not far from the Nile, women began one of the most important tasks of the day. Preparing food. Much of this work was physically demanding. Grain needed to be ground into flour using heavy stone tools. The motion was repetitive and tiring. Arms and shoulders worked steadily for long periods. Bread dough had to be mixed and shaped. Ovens required attention. These tasks often continued every day throughout the year. Because of this constant effort, the evening hours held special value. When the day's work finally slowed, even simple rest felt rewarding. Nearby, children carried water from communal sources. They balanced jars carefully while moving through narrow streets. Some laughed and talked with friends. Others focused quietly on their task. Life in ancient Egypt involved responsibility from a young age. Most children contributed to household work in some way. By evening, they too welcomed the chance to sit with family members and enjoy cooler air. Along the riverbanks, fishermen repaired nets damaged during earlier trips. Their fingers moved patiently through loops of cord. Small tiers needed fixing before the next journey. The work required attention but often unfolded at a slower pace than many daytime tasks. Some fishermen preferred performing these repairs during evening hours. The cooler temperatures made the work more comfortable. Friends sat nearby. Conversations drifted between practical matters and everyday stories. The river provided a peaceful backdrop. Elsewhere, builders continued labor on homes, walls, storage buildings, and larger projects. Stone, mud brick, wood, and tools filled their days. The physical demands were considerable. Sweat mixed with dust. The sun reflected from pale surfaces. Hours passed slowly. When evening finally arrived, many workers sought shade before doing anything else. Simply sitting still could feel deeply satisfying. This pattern repeated throughout Egyptian society. The harder the work, the greater the appreciation for rest. A cool breeze carried enormous value. A quiet conversation offered comfort. A simple meal became something to enjoy rather than merely consume. As afternoon approached, heat gathered once again across the land. The streets became brighter. The stone walls absorbed sunlight. The desert beyond the cultivated fields shimmered beneath the sky. People moved more slowly. Whenever possible, they searched for shade. Trees became gathering places. Covered courtyards provided relief. Buildings with thick mud brick walls helped keep interiors cooler. Many people thought ahead toward evening. Not consciously every moment, perhaps. But they knew relief would come. The sun would eventually lower. The river breeze would strengthen. the hardest heat would pass. For thousands of years, Egyptians lived within this repeating cycle. Morning labor, afternoon endurance, evening relaxation, nighttime rest. The rhythm became as familiar as the flow of the Nile itself. And because it was so familiar, it shaped expectations and habits across entire generations. Grandparents taught children routines they had learned from their own elders. Families gathered in similar ways year after year. Certain stories were told repeatedly. Songs were sung again and again. Meals followed patterns shaped by season and tradition. These repeated experiences created stability. In a world where harvests, river floods, and health could never be guaranteed, familiar routines provided reassurance. As another afternoon slowly moved toward sunset, workers glanced toward the sky. Shadows lengthened. The brightness softened. A few birds crossed overhead. The river reflected golden light. Soon the evening would return. And with it would come one of the most cherished parts of life in ancient Egypt. The slow, gentle hours after sunset. Hours filled not with urgency, but with rest. Hours when tired workers could sit outside their homes, feel the cool air against their skin, share food with family, listen to distant music, and watch darkness settle peacefully over the Nile. The river had seen these evenings for countless generations. And it continued flowing quietly through them all. The sun lowered little by little. Its bright glare softened into warm gold. Fields near the river glowed beneath the evening light. Long shadows stretched across pathways worn smooth by countless footsteps. Palm trees swayed gently as the air slowly cooled. This was the hour many people waited for throughout the day. Work was not always finished, but the hardest part was often behind them. A farmer carrying tools toward home walked more slowly now. There was no rush. The evening encouraged patience. Dust clung to his sandals. His clothing held traces of the day's labor. Yet with every step, the promise of rest came closer. In nearby villages, cooking fires began appearing one by one. Thin streams of smoke rose into the calm air. The scent of baking bread drifted through narrow streets. People emerged from workshops. Market stalls closed. Animals were guided into secure enclosures for the night. The entire community seemed to exhale together. Children noticed the change as well. The heat no longer pressed down so heavily. Outdoor play became pleasant again. Small groups gathered near homes, talking quietly while adults prepared the evening meal. Laughter carried through the air. The Nile reflected the colors of sunset. Orange light shimmered across the moving water. Fishing boats returned toward shore. Their dark silhouettes glided slowly against the glowing river. For a few moments, everything seemed softer. The light. The sounds. The pace of movement. Even conversations often became calmer. After long days of effort, people naturally settled into a gentler rhythm. As darkness approached, lamps would soon be lit. Families would gather. Stories would be shared. Music might drift from a nearby courtyard. And once again, ancient Egypt would enter its favorite hours. The peaceful time between sunset and sleep. The time when the world finally slowed. The last edge of the sun slipped below the western horizon. For a few moments, the sky remained filled with color. Soft bands of gold, amber, and fading rose stretched above the Nile Valley. The river carried these colors upon its surface, breaking them into thousands of tiny reflections that drifted slowly downstream. People paused to watch. Not everyone stopped their work completely, but many noticed the change. After a day spent beneath bright sunlight, sunset felt like a quiet reward. The heat was leaving. The shadows were growing longer. The air felt lighter. Along the riverbanks, fishermen secured their boats for the night. Wooden hulls nudged gently against one another as ropes were tied. Nets were hung to dry or folded carefully for the next day's work. One fisherman sat for a moment before going home. His hands rested on his knees. The river moved quietly before him. He listened to the soft splash of water against the shore. There was nothing urgent left to do. The evening belonged to stillness. Nearby, a group of farmers followed a dusty path toward their village. Their conversations were unhurried. The day's work had been completed as well as it could be. Tomorrow would bring new tasks. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But those concerns belonged to another sunrise. For now, there was only the cool evening breeze. As darkness spread across the valley, lamps began appearing inside homes. The glow of each flame was small, yet together they transformed villages into gentle islands of light. Through open doorways came the smell of food. Fresh bread. Cooked vegetables. Fish from the river. Dates and figs gathered from nearby groves. Families sat together to eat. Meals were often simple, but hunger made them satisfying. After hours of labor, even ordinary food could feel comforting. Children listened while adults talked quietly. Some conversations concerned crops and weather. Others concerned neighbors, relatives, or plans for future work. Stories moved naturally between generations. Knowledge passed from elders to younger family members. This sharing of time together was itself a form of relaxation. No one hurried. The darkness outside encouraged people to slow down. A lamp flickered against a mud-brick wall. The warm light revealed woven baskets, clay jars, sleeping mats, and simple household tools. Everything felt familiar. Everything felt safe. In wealthier homes, the evening unfolded somewhat differently. Larger rooms offered more space. Courtyards provided pleasant gathering areas. Servants brought food and drink. Musicians occasionally performed while guests sat beneath the evening sky. The gentle sounds of harps floated through the air. Flutes played slow melodies. Incense released sweet fragrances that mixed with the scent of flowering plants. Yet despite these differences, rich and poor alike shared the same relief. The sun had set. The heat had passed. The night had arrived. And with it came rest. As the stars appeared overhead, many families moved outdoors. The air was cooler there. Courtyards became gathering places. Roofs became peaceful retreats. People sat together beneath the vast Egyptian sky. Some spoke softly. Some listened. Some simply enjoyed the quiet. A grandmother might tell a familiar story. Children might lean against parents and watch the stars emerge one by one. A young worker might sit silently after a demanding day, grateful for the chance to do nothing at all. Across the Nile Valley, thousands of similar scenes unfolded. Different homes. Different families. Different lives. Yet all connected by the same evening rhythm. The rhythm of work giving way to rest. The rhythm of sunlight giving way to darkness. The rhythm of ancient Egypt itself. As the evening deepened, the sounds of daily labor became distant memories. The pounding of grain stones slowed. The noise of busy markets disappeared. The voices of merchants faded from the streets. A softer world emerged. This quieter Egypt was familiar to everyone. The Nile remained at the center of it all. Even at night, the river shaped life. Its presence could be felt almost everywhere. A cool breeze often traveled across the water and into nearby settlements. People welcomed it eagerly. After enduring the heat of the day, that breeze felt refreshing against tired skin. Many families deliberately spent time outdoors after sunset. Inside homes, temperatures sometimes remained warm long after daylight ended. Outside, air moved more freely. Courtyards filled with conversation. Roofs became places of gathering. Neighbors visited one another. The pace remained slow. No one needed to hurry. Darkness encouraged patience. A man repairing a fishing net worked carefully by lamplight. His hands moved through familiar motions learned over many years. Nearby, relatives talked quietly. The task continued, but it no longer felt like labor. The evening changed the feeling of work. Simple activities became calmer. More relaxed. Less demanding. Elsewhere, a woman sat weaving fibers into useful household items. The repetitive motion was steady and peaceful. Children listened to a story nearby. The smell of fresh bread still lingered in the air. Occasionally someone laughed softly. The atmosphere remained gentle. Throughout ancient Egypt, storytelling flourished during these hours. Without printed books, stories traveled through memory and speech. Some tales had been passed down for generations. Others described local events or family histories. Many stories were told again and again. Listeners never seemed to mind. The familiar words brought comfort. Children often requested favorite stories repeatedly. Grandparents gladly obliged. The stories belonged to the evening. They belonged to the quiet hours when work was finished and families gathered together. Music also drifted through some communities. Not every evening included musicians, but music was deeply woven into Egyptian life. A simple flute melody could travel surprisingly far through cool night air. The notes rose gently above rooftops. They mingled with the sounds of insects and distant river water. Nothing needed to be loud. Nothing needed to demand attention. The purpose was not excitement. The purpose was atmosphere. The purpose was calm. Many people simply sat and listened. The stars continued multiplying overhead. Constellations became clearer as darkness deepened. The desert horizon disappeared into shadow. The river reflected occasional points of starlight. For countless generations, Egyptians had watched this same sky. Children looked upward and saw what their grandparents had seen. Their grandparents had seen what earlier generations had seen before them. The continuity brought a quiet sense of stability. Life changed. People grew older. Children became adults. Harvests succeeded or failed. The Nile rose and fell. Yet the stars returned every night. Reliable. Familiar. Comforting. As hours passed, conversation gradually became softer. Children grew sleepy. Some rested against parents. Others had already fallen asleep where they sat. The day's exhaustion was finally catching up with them. Adults felt it too. The body naturally slowed when darkness arrived. Muscles relaxed. Thoughts became less urgent. The evening encouraged rest. And across ancient Egypt, countless tired workers welcomed that invitation. Far from royal palaces and grand temples, most Egyptians lived ordinary lives. Their evenings reflected the simplicity. A small mud-brick home near the river. A cooking fire slowly fading. A family gathered beneath the stars. These scenes repeated across the Nile Valley for centuries. Many homes were modest. Rooms served multiple purposes. Space was limited. Yet people adapted skillfully to their environment. When indoor air became warm, rooftops provided relief. When courtyards caught a breeze, families gathered there. When darkness arrived, everyday concerns seemed less pressing. The evening created room for quiet moments. A father might sharpen a simple tool while talking with his son. A mother might finish repairing clothing while listening to relatives tell stories. An elderly family member might watch younger generations and remember earlier years. No grand event was necessary. Relaxation often emerged from ordinary companionship. The Nile itself encouraged this slower pace. Its constant presence reminded people of continuity. Day after day, year after year, the river flowed. It nourished crops, provided fish, supported transportation, and during the evening, it offered beauty. Many people spent time near the water whenever possible. The sound alone could be soothing. Gentle waves touching the shore. Reeds rustling in the breeze. The occasional splash of fish near the surface. These sounds formed a natural evening soundtrack. As darkness deepened further, the night became cooler. The difference could be remarkable after a hot day. People who had struggled through intense sunlight now breathed comfortably. The relief spread through tired muscles. Bodies that had worked since dawn finally relaxed. This physical comfort was an important part of evening life. Relaxation was not merely emotional. It was deeply practical. The cooling temperature transformed the experience of living. Tasks became easier. Conversations lasted longer. Sleep came more comfortably. Even simple sitting felt pleasant. Across villages and towns, lamps continued flickering. Their warm glow illuminated small sections of the darkness. Beyond those circles of light lay the quiet night. The desert. The river. The endless sky. Together they created a world that felt vast yet peaceful. A world where ordinary workers could temporarily set aside their responsibilities. A world where tired hands could finally rest. A world where families could gather close and enjoy the simplest pleasures. The evening meal. The cool breeze. The familiar voices of loved ones. And above them all, the stars shining silently over ancient Egypt. The night continued to unfold slowly over the Nile Valley. Hours passed almost unnoticed. The air had grown cooler now, and many families remained outside rather than returning indoors. The rooftops of mud-brick homes held the last traces of warmth gathered during the day. People sat on woven mats, leaning comfortably against low walls while looking out across the darkened landscape. From above, the villages seemed peaceful. Small lamps glowed here and there like tiny stars scattered across the earth. Most of the day's movement had ended. The roads that were crowded only a few hours earlier now lay quiet beneath the night sky. The Nile flowed through it all. In the darkness, its surface looked almost black except where moonlight touched the water. There, silver reflections drifted slowly with the current. Reeds along the riverbank swayed gently whenever the breeze strengthened. A farmer sat beside his family and listened. He had spent the day working beneath the sun. His back ached. His hands were rough. Dust still lingered on his sandals despite washing before supper. Yet now none of that seemed especially important. The work was finished. Tomorrow could wait. The sounds around him were simple and familiar. Children whispering. Palm leaves rustling. A distant dog barking somewhere across the village. The quiet splash of river water. These sounds had accompanied his evenings for years. Perhaps even decades. Their familiarity brought comfort. Across Egypt, many people experienced a similar feeling. The evening was not exciting. It was not filled with surprises. And that was exactly why it felt relaxing. Predictability offered peace. People knew what the night would bring. Food shared with family. Conversation. Cool air. Gradually growing sleepiness. Then rest. The rhythm rarely changed. Generations followed it. Parents taught it to children. Children grew into adults and continued the same habits. The evening became a trusted companion at the end of every difficult day. Nearby, an elderly woman began telling a story she had shared many times before. The younger children listened closely despite already knowing parts of it. The familiar tale unfolded slowly. Its details were less important than the experience itself. The sound of a loved one's voice. The comfort of gathering together. The feeling of safety while darkness surrounded the village. Stories provided more than entertainment. They filled the quiet hours gently. No one rushed the storyteller. No one hurried toward sleep. The night was long. There was time. That sense of having time may have been one of the greatest luxuries available to ordinary Egyptians after sunset. Daylight hours often belonged to obligations. Fields needed attention. Animals required care. Food preparation never truly ended. Repairs constantly demanded effort. But during certain evening hours, those responsibilities loosened their grip. People could simply exist. They could sit quietly. Watch the stars. Listen to music. Share memories. Or say very little at all. Silence was not uncomfortable. In many families, silence was a natural part of relaxation. A person might spend several minutes simply looking toward the river without speaking. Others understood. The day had been long. Words were not always necessary. The gentle presence of family was enough. As the moon climbed higher, shadows shifted across rooftops and courtyards. Palm trees stretched dark shapes across the ground. Temple walls reflected pale light. The village looked different than it had during the day. Softer. More mysterious. Yet also calmer. The darkness seemed to smooth away the sharp edges of daily life. Tools were put away. Markets were closed. Workshops were silent. Only homes remained active. And even there, activity was gradually slowing. Children's voices became quieter. Conversations shortened. Yawns appeared more often. The body recognized the hour. Rest was approaching. The night invited everyone toward sleep. For many Egyptians, one of the most pleasant parts of the evening came after the meal had ended. The work of preparing food was complete. Hunger had been satisfied. The hottest hours were gone. What remained was a period of gentle comfort. In wealthier households, servants cleared dishes while family members relaxed in courtyards scented with flowers and incense. In modest homes, family members cleaned up together and then settled into familiar places for the rest of the evening. The details differed. The feeling was often similar. Relief. Along narrow village streets, neighbors occasionally stopped to talk before retiring for the night. Friendships grew through these small conversations. People discussed crops, weather, family matters, and daily events. Nothing needed to be dramatic. Ordinary topics filled the evening perfectly well. Life itself provided enough material. A successful fishing trip. A repaired roof. A healthy newborn animal. The changing level of the river. The progress of a harvest. Such conversations connected communities. They reminded people that they were not facing life's challenges alone. Everyone worked hard. Everyone became tired. Everyone appreciated the arrival of night. Farther from the villages, the fields rested beneath moonlight. Rows of crops stood motionless in the darkness. Irrigation channels reflected faint silver light. The same land that demanded so much labor during daylight now appeared peaceful and still. The transformation was remarkable. A place of effort became a place of quiet beauty. Some farmers occasionally walked through their fields during the evening. Not because work required it, simply because the cooler temperatures made such walks enjoyable. They could inspect crops slowly without sweating beneath the sun. They could listen to insects singing among the plants. They could enjoy the calm that only arrived after sunset. Near the river, fishermen often appreciated the night in their own way. The daytime Nile was busy. Boats moved constantly. People traveled. Goods were transported. Voices carried across the water. At night, much of that activity faded. The river felt larger, more peaceful. Moonlight created long shimmering pathways across its surface. A person sitting quietly on the shore might watch those reflections for a long time. There was something endlessly calming about moving water. The Nile never stopped flowing. Yet it never seemed hurried. Its steady movement matched the slow rhythm of the evening itself. Elsewhere, scribes ended their day differently. Their labor depended more upon concentration than physical strength. Hours spent reading and writing could leave the mind tired even when the body felt relatively rested. Evening allowed those minds to relax. Papyrus scrolls were set aside. Ink and brushes were stored. Calculations and records could wait until morning. For a while, there was no need to focus. No need to remember details. No need to solve problems. Only the simple pleasures of the evening remained. A cool breeze. A shared meal. The company of family. The sight of stars emerging overhead. As the night deepened, these pleasures became even more noticeable. The world was growing quieter. The darkness felt softer. The pace slowed further. Across Egypt, thousands of tired people settled into the most restful part of their day. Eventually, many families began preparing their sleeping spaces. This process happened gradually. No signal announced it. No bell marked the hour. Instead, the night itself provided the invitation. Children grew sleepy first. Their conversations became shorter. Their eyes grew heavy. Some fell asleep while listening to stories. Others rested against parents before being gently moved to sleeping mats. Adults remained awake a little longer. The quiet hours after children slept often carried a special sense of calm. Conversations became softer. The topics sometimes turned reflective. People spoke about family members, memories, hopes for future harvests, or plans for upcoming work. The darkness encouraged thoughtful discussion. Yet even these conversations rarely lasted too long. Exhaustion eventually reached everyone. Life in ancient Egypt demanded energy. The body naturally sought recovery. On rooftops, sleeping areas were arranged carefully. Woven mats were unrolled. Simple bedding was prepared. Family members selected places where the breeze felt strongest. Comfort depended less on luxury and more on airflow. The cool night air mattered greatly. Below, in courtyards and homes, lamps burned lower. Oil was valuable. Once activities ended, there was little reason to keep flames burning brightly. The darkness gradually expanded. Only a few points of light remained. The stars above seemed brighter because of it. For a moment, imagine standing beside the Nile during one of these ancient nights. The village behind you is nearly asleep. Most lamps have been extinguished. The moon hangs above the water. Palm trees sway gently in the breeze. The scent of earth and river water fills the air. Somewhere nearby, a family settles onto sleeping mats. A child whispers a final question. A parent answers softly. Then silence returns. Nothing dramatic happens. Nothing extraordinary occurs. And yet the scene feels deeply peaceful. Perhaps that is because relaxation in ancient Egypt was rarely built around excitement. Instead, it emerged from simple things repeated faithfully over time. The coolness after heat. Rest after labor. Food after hunger. Silence after noise. These contrasts shaped everyday life. They made ordinary experiences feel meaningful. A person who had spent 10 hours beneath the sun appreciated shade more deeply. A worker carrying heavy loads appreciated sitting still. A family separated by daily responsibilities appreciated gathering together at night. The evening brought these gifts every day. Reliable. Expected. Welcome. As more people drifted into sleep, the village became increasingly quiet. The day's final conversations ended. The last footsteps faded. Only the sounds of nature remained. The gentle movement of the Nile. The whisper of wind through reeds. The occasional call of a night bird. Beneath the vast Egyptian sky, ordinary people rested. Their bodies recovered. Their minds settled. And while they slept, the ancient river continued its endless journey through the darkness, carrying the calm of the night gently toward another dawn. The deepest hours of the night arrived quietly. Most people never noticed exactly when it happened. Sleep had already carried them away from the concerns of the day. The fields, the workshops, the kitchens, and the busy riverbanks all seemed very far away now. The village rested. Moonlight lay across rooftops and narrow streets. It touched the tops of walls and the leaves of date palms. It reflected softly in water jars left outside to cool during the night. Everything appeared still. Yet the ancient world was never completely silent. A breeze moved through the reeds beside the Nile. Somewhere in the darkness, a bird shifted in its nest. Far away, a donkey stirred briefly before settling again. These small sounds blended naturally into the peaceful atmosphere. For many Egyptians, sleep itself was one of the greatest forms of comfort. Life required constant effort. Food had to be grown. Homes needed maintenance. Clothing wore out and required repair. Tools broke and had to be replaced. Every day brought responsibilities. Night offered a temporary release from them all. A farmer sleeping beneath the stars no longer worried about irrigation channels. A fisherman no longer thought about his nets. A merchant no longer counted goods. A scribe no longer reviewed records. For a few precious hours, everyone stepped away from their duties. The night belonged to rest. On a rooftop overlooking the river, an elderly man slept peacefully beside his family. His life had followed the same rhythms for many decades. He had watched countless sunsets. He had felt countless evening breezes. He had listened to countless nights beside the Nile. The routines had become deeply familiar. And perhaps that familiarity itself brought comfort. The Nile remained unchanged. The stars returned every evening. The seasons continued their cycle. Even as people aged and generations passed, these patterns endured. There was reassurance in that. The ancient Egyptians lived in a world where much depended upon nature. The annual flood of the Nile determined the success of crops. Weather influenced harvests. Health could change suddenly. Yet amidst uncertainty, certain things remained dependable. Night always followed day. The river always flowed. The stars always appeared overhead. These simple truths formed the background of everyday life. As midnight passed, the air became even cooler. The warmth stored in stone walls and rooftops gradually faded. People sleeping outdoors often rested more comfortably during these hours than at any other time. The heavy heat of afternoon felt like a distant memory. Breathing was easy. Muscles relaxed. The body recovered. Across the Nile Valley, thousands upon thousands of people slept beneath the same sky. Some rested in humble homes made of mud brick. Others slept within larger residences surrounded by gardens. Yet regardless of wealth, everyone shared the experience of night. Everyone welcomed relief from the heat. Everyone appreciated the quiet. Everyone depended upon rest. The darkness united them. And so the hours drifted onward. Slowly. Peacefully. Without hurry. Near the riverbanks, the Nile continued its endless movement. The water never stopped. Day or night. Season after season. Year after year. It flowed steadily through Egypt, carrying life with it. Even while people slept, the river remained active. Small currents moved beneath the moonlight. Fish traveled through deeper waters. Reeds swayed gently at the edges of the shore. The river seemed calm from a distance, yet it was always alive. Many Egyptians felt a deep connection to the Nile. Their food depended upon it. Their travel depended upon it. Their communities existed because of it. After sunset, the river often became one of the most relaxing places to be. The daytime bustle disappeared. The noise faded. The water seemed larger and quieter. Imagine a warm evening beside the Nile many thousands of years ago. A fisherman sits near the shore after supper. His boat is secured. His work is finished. The stars are beginning to appear. The river reflects the first light of the moon. He has nowhere else to be. Nothing else to do. So he simply watches the water. Moments like these likely occurred throughout Egyptian history. Not because they were special, but because they were ordinary. And ordinary moments often brought the greatest peace. Nearby villages depended heavily upon cooperation. Families helped one another. Neighbors shared information. Communities worked together during harvests and other demanding periods. These social connections continued into the evening. After sunset, people gathered naturally. Some visited relatives. Others sat with neighbors. Many remained close to home. The specific activity mattered less than the feeling. Being together. Sharing the end of the day. Listening to familiar voices. For elderly Egyptians, these gatherings may have carried particular meaning. Years of experience gave them stories to tell. Memories to share. Advice to offer younger generations. The evening created space for such conversations. There was no need to rush. No pressing task demanded immediate attention. The darkness encouraged patience. Children often sat quietly while older relatives spoke. They learned family histories, local traditions, practical knowledge, and sometimes simple stories passed down through generations. The flickering light of an oil lamp made these moments feel warm and intimate. Shadows moved across walls. Faces glowed softly in the darkness. The atmosphere invited listening. It invited calm. As the hours passed, conversation gradually faded. One by one, family members became sleepy. The day's labor eventually caught up with everyone. Even the most interesting story could not compete with exhaustion. Slowly, people prepared for sleep. The village quieted. The stars climbed higher. And the river continued flowing beneath the moon. Not every evening in ancient Egypt was identical. The seasons changed. The Nile rose and fell. Temperatures shifted throughout the year. Yet certain patterns remained remarkably consistent. One season brought particular relief. The months following the annual inundation. When the Nile flooded, it spread fertile silt across the fields. This natural event was essential for agriculture. It shaped Egyptian life more than almost anything else. After the flood waters receded, rich soil remained behind. Farmers prepared fields for planting. The cycle continued once again. Even during these changing seasons, evenings retained their special place. After long days spent managing crops and irrigation, people still looked forward to sunset. The cooling air still felt welcome. Family gatherings still offered comfort. The stars still appeared above the river. During especially hot periods, the contrast between day and night became even more noticeable. Afternoons could feel endless. The sunlight seemed to hang over the land without moving. Dust clung to clothing. Sweat gathered quickly. Shade became precious. Then, gradually, evening arrived. The transformation felt almost magical. Not because anything extraordinary happened, but because discomfort slowly disappeared. The breeze returned. The shadows lengthened. The air softened. People emerged from shaded spaces and gathered outdoors. Children played. Adults talked. Meals were prepared. Life became easier. This daily transition repeated thousands of times throughout a person's life. A farmer who lived to old age might witness more than 20,000 sunsets. Each one carried familiar promises. Relief. Rest. Recovery. The opportunity to spend time with loved ones. The opportunity to simply be still. Many ancient Egyptians probably never thought of relaxation as a separate activity. It was woven naturally into everyday life. There was no need to schedule it. No need to plan for it. The evening itself created the conditions. The environment encouraged it. Darkness slowed movement. Cool temperatures invited gathering. The completion of work allowed people to rest. Everything happened naturally. A mother finishing household tasks might finally sit beside her family. A laborer returning home could stretch tired legs and enjoy a meal. Children could listen to stories. Grandparents could share memories. The evening welcomed everyone equally. As another night deepened across the Nile Valley, the familiar sounds returned. The gentle movement of water. The whisper of palm leaves. The distant call of a bird. The murmur of quiet conversation. Then, eventually, silence. A peaceful silence that settled over homes, fields, and riverbanks alike. The same silence that had comforted generations before. The same silence that would comfort generations yet to come. And beneath the endless stars of ancient Egypt, the people rested once more, allowing the calm night to carry them gently toward sleep. The night moved forward with the same steady patience as the Nile itself. Nothing hurried. Nothing demanded attention. The world seemed content to rest exactly as it was. Across the river valley, families slept beneath rooftops, inside courtyards, and within simple rooms cooled by the evening air. The day's worries had faded into dreams. Tools sat untouched. Markets stood empty. Fields waited quietly beneath the moonlight. In the darkness, Egypt felt very different from the busy land that existed beneath the sun. During daylight, every corner of life carried movement. Workers crossed dusty roads. Animals pulled loads. Boats traveled along the river. Merchants called out to customers. Children ran between homes. But now, much of that energy had disappeared. Only stillness remained. The moon cast a pale glow across the landscape. Its light touched temple walls built generations earlier. It illuminated irrigation canals winding through the fields. It reflected from the smooth surfaces of clay jars left outside homes. Everywhere it reached, the world appeared softer, gentler. A traveler passing through Egypt during these hours might have noticed how peaceful the settlements seemed. Even larger towns became quiet after dark. Voices lowered naturally. Footsteps became less frequent. People conserved both energy and lamp oil. The night encouraged simplicity. For ordinary Egyptians, evening relaxation was not something separate from life. It was life. The day's labor ended. Families gathered. Food was shared. Stories were told. The stars appeared. Then sleep arrived. This rhythm repeated so often that it became woven into the fabric of existence. Generations lived within it. Generations found comfort in it. Near one small village, an elderly fisherman awoke briefly during the night. Perhaps a cool breeze crossed his face. Perhaps a distant sound reached his ears. He opened his eyes and looked upward. Above him stretched a sky filled with stars. For a moment he simply watched. No thoughts of work. No plans for tomorrow. Only the quiet beauty of the night. Then his eyes closed again. Sleep returned. Moments like this likely happened countless times throughout Egyptian history. Small moments. Forgettable moments. Yet they formed the texture of everyday life. History often remembers kings, monuments, and battles. But most people spent their lives experiencing evenings like these. Sitting with family. Listening to the river. Watching the stars. Feeling relief as the heat finally faded. The comfort of those experiences mattered deeply. They helped people endure difficult work. They provided balance. They offered peace. The Nile Valley may have been a place of great accomplishments, but it was also a place of ordinary human routines. And those routines often ended with quiet nights beneath an enormous sky. As the hours passed, a light mist began forming in some areas near the river. It hovered low over the water and drifted through reeds along the shore. The moonlight turned it silver. The scene appeared almost dreamlike. Yet for the people sleeping nearby, it was simply another night. Another familiar chapter in a life shaped by the rhythms of nature. The river flowed. The stars watched overhead. And Egypt rested. Eventually, the darkest part of the night arrived. This was the hour when even the most active villages became nearly silent. The conversations had ended long ago. The stories were finished. The lamps had burned low. Only a handful of faint lights remained visible in the distance. Most homes were completely dark. Families slept closely together. Parents rested beside children. Grandparents slept nearby. The warmth of companionship offered comfort even during cooler nights. Inside mud-brick homes, thick walls helped maintain a stable temperature. Outside, rooftops caught gentle breezes. People selected sleeping places carefully based on the season and weather. Comfort was practical. It came from understanding the environment. Knowing where air moved. Knowing where shade lingered. Knowing how to make the most of each evening's cooling temperatures. This knowledge passed naturally between generations. Children learned by watching adults. They learned where to sleep during hot months. They learned evening routines. They learned when to prepare food, when to gather water, and when to rest. Life moved according to patterns refined over centuries. Along the Nile, a few fishermen remained awake. Night fishing sometimes offered advantages. The river felt calm. The air was cooler. Certain fish were easier to catch during darkness. Small boats drifted quietly beneath the stars. Lantern light reflected from the water. Voices remained low. No one wished to disturb the stillness. Even work seemed quieter at night. The river encouraged that. Everything about it suggested patience. Its waters never rushed. They simply continued onward. Steady. Reliable. Endless. Back in the villages, dogs occasionally stirred. A baby might wake briefly. Someone turned over in sleep. Then silence returned. These tiny interruptions only emphasized how peaceful the night had become. The ancient Egyptians understood darkness differently than many people today. Without artificial lighting, night felt more complete. The stars appeared brighter. Shadows seemed deeper. The boundary between human settlements and the natural world felt closer. People lived with that darkness every day. They respected it. They adapted to it. And often, they found comfort within it. For children growing up beside the Nile, the sounds of night became familiar companions. The rustling of reeds. The distant call of birds. The movement of water. These sounds accompanied them throughout life. Many likely found them reassuring. Silence was never truly empty. It was filled with the quiet voice of the landscape itself. As the night continued, the moon slowly crossed the sky. Its position changed almost imperceptibly. Shadows shifted. The river reflected new angles of light. Time moved forward gently. No clocks announced the passing hours. Nature handled that task. The stars changed position. The air cooled further. The world prepared itself for another dawn. But dawn remained far away. For now, Egypt belonged to the night. A peaceful, sleeping Egypt. A land resting between one day's labor and the next. In some households, dreams held special significance. Ancient Egyptians often paid attention to dreams and their possible meanings. Certain dreams were believed to carry messages, warnings, or signs. Priests sometimes interpreted dreams, and written records from ancient Egypt include collections of dream meanings. Yet for most people, dreams were simply part of sleep. A farmer might dream of healthy crops swaying beside irrigation channels. A fisherman might dream of a successful catch. A merchant might dream of distant journeys along the river. Children might dream of stories they heard before bedtime. The details changed from person to person. But the experience of dreaming connected everyone. Sleep transported people away from their daily responsibilities. For a few hours, fields, workshops, and marketplaces disappeared. The body rested. The mind wandered. Outside, the night continued its slow journey. A cool wind traveled across the river and through clusters of date palms. Leaves rustled softly. The sound blended with the steady murmur of flowing water. Somewhere along the shoreline, a heron stood motionless, waiting patiently in the darkness. The bird paid no attention to human schedules. It existed within its own rhythm. Much of nature did. The Egyptians observed these rhythms closely. They watched the seasons. They watched the river. They watched the stars. Their lives depended upon paying attention. This connection to the natural world influenced how they relaxed. Evening rest often happened outdoors because that was where comfort could be found. Fresh air. Cool temperatures. Open skies. The environment itself became part of the experience. Imagine a rooftop late at night. A family sleeps peacefully beneath a blanket of stars. The moonlight touches nearby walls. The air feels cool against the skin. From far away comes the faint sound of the Nile moving through the darkness. Nothing else demands attention. No task remains unfinished tonight. No labor can be done until morning. There is only rest. Only stillness. Only the calm embrace of the ancient night. These moments repeated endlessly throughout Egyptian history. Year after year. Century after century. Generations came and went. Children grew into adults. Adults became elders. Yet the evening remained remarkably familiar. The sun still set. The air still cooled. Families still gathered. The stars still appeared overhead. And after the quiet hours of relaxation, sleep still arrived. The simple beauty of that routine endured across ages. Far from royal ceremonies and monumental construction projects, this was where most lives unfolded. Not in grand halls. Not on battlefields. But in homes beside the Nile. In conversations beneath the stars. In shared meals after long days of labor. In peaceful evenings that gradually faded into sleep. And as another ancient night stretched gently onward, Egypt remained wrapped in silence, comfort, and the timeless rhythm of rest beside the river. The hours before dawn carried a special kind of quiet. It was different from the silence that arrived shortly after sunset. Earlier in the evening, families were still awake. Conversations drifted through courtyards. Lamps glowed in windows. The sounds of life lingered gently in the air. But now, deep in the night, almost everything had fallen still. The Nile moved through the darkness as it always had. Its waters reflected the fading moon. Along the riverbanks, reeds swayed softly whenever a breeze passed through them. The sound was delicate and steady, almost like a whisper repeated over and over again. Most people remained asleep. The farmer who had spent the day tending crops rested beneath a light covering on his rooftop. The fisherman slept beside nets that would need attention tomorrow. The baker, the merchant, the potter, the servant, and the scribe all shared the same gift for a few more hours. Rest. Their bodies recovered quietly. The aches of labor softened. The mind drifted through dreams. The concerns of the coming day had not yet arrived. For a little while longer, the world asked nothing of them. Across Egypt, the stars remained bright. Without lamps illuminating the landscape, the heavens appeared vast and endless. Children growing up in ancient Egypt would have known the sky intimately. Night after night they watched familiar constellations rise above the horizon. They learned the shapes and patterns long before they understood many other things about the world. The stars became companions. Reliable travelers crossing the darkness overhead. Many older people likely found comfort in that familiarity. The same stars that shone above them as children still shone above them decades later. Life changed. Families changed. Villages changed. Yet the sky remained. There was peace in that continuity. A gentle reminder that some things endured beyond the worries of a single day. The cool air settled over the Nile Valley. Mud-brick walls released the last traces of stored warmth. Palm trees stood motionless against the night sky. Even the animals were quiet now. Only the river continued speaking in its soft, endless language of flowing water. If someone had walked through a village during these hours, they might have noticed how peaceful everything appeared. Sleeping mats arranged carefully on rooftops. Clay jars standing beside walls. Tools resting where they had been placed before sunset. A few fading embers glowing faintly in cooking hearths. Nothing moved quickly. Nothing disturbed the calm. the entire community seemed to breathe slowly together. The night wrapped around it all like a gentle blanket. And so the hours passed. Not dramatically. Not suddenly. But with the same slow rhythm that shaped every part of life beside the Nile. Long before sunrise, the world began changing in small ways. The darkness remained, but it no longer felt quite as deep. The moon had traveled farther across the sky. The stars shifted almost invisibly overhead. The air carried a subtle freshness that often arrived before dawn. Few people noticed these changes consciously. Most were still sleeping. Yet nature was already preparing for morning. Along the riverbanks, certain birds stirred before the first light appeared. A faint call echoed through the reeds. Then silence returned. Minutes later, another sound followed from farther away. The valley was waking very slowly. For those still asleep, the final hours of rest were often the most comfortable. The heat of the previous day had completely faded. The cool air made sleeping pleasant. Families resting on rooftops could feel gentle breezes moving across their faces. Children shifted beneath blankets. Parents slept deeply after long hours of labor. Grandparents rested nearby. Several generations shared the same peaceful night. In one village, a grandmother opened her eyes briefly. She looked upward. The stars still filled the sky. The air felt cool. The world was quiet. For a few moments she simply listened. Then she closed her eyes again and returned to sleep. These small moments rarely appear in historical records. No scribe wrote them down. No monument celebrated them. Yet they were part of real lives. They happened thousands of times across Egypt. Ordinary people experiencing ordinary nights. Finding comfort in familiar routines. History often focuses on extraordinary events. But most lives are built from simple evenings and peaceful mornings. The Egyptian farmer remembered his fields. The fisherman remembered the river. The mother remembered her family. The child remembered stories heard beneath the stars. These quiet experiences formed the foundation of daily existence. They mattered deeply even if they left no written trace. The Nile Valley itself seemed to understand patience. The river never rushed. The seasons unfolded gradually. The floodwaters arrived according to their cycle. Crops grew in their own time. Even the sunrise approached slowly. Nothing needed to happen quickly. This rhythm shaped how people relaxed. Evening conversations stretched comfortably. Meals lasted as long as needed. Stories unfolded without urgency. People allowed moments to breathe. They allowed silence to exist. And because of that, the transition from labor to rest felt natural. As the first hint of pale color began touching the eastern horizon, the night entered its final chapter. The stars remained visible. The moon still shone. Yet change was coming. Another day would soon begin. Another cycle of work and rest would unfold. The people of ancient Egypt knew this rhythm well. They had lived within it their entire lives. And perhaps that familiarity made the evenings even more precious. Because every sunset promised the return of something comforting. Cool air. Family voices. Gentle stories. Quiet reflection. The peaceful hours beside the Nile. The first light of dawn appeared softly. A pale silver glow spread across the horizon. The stars nearest the east began fading. The river reflected the changing sky in long bands of muted color. Night was slowly releasing its hold on the land. Yet for a few moments, the world remained suspended between darkness and day. These were some of the calmest moments in ancient Egypt. The day's work had not yet begun. The noise of activity had not yet returned. Even many animals remained still. The valley seemed to pause. A fisherman sleeping near his boat opened his eyes. The cool air greeted him. He sat quietly and looked toward the river. Mist hovered above the water in delicate ribbons. The surface of the Nile appeared smooth and calm. No voices reached him yet. No market sounds. No pounding grain stones. Only silence and flowing water. He stayed seated for a while. There was no reason to hurry. Soon enough the day would demand his attention. Soon enough he would prepare nets, check equipment, and travel along the river. But for now he simply watched the dawn. Nearby, smoke had not yet begun rising from household fires. Most rooftops still held sleeping families. Children remained wrapped in dreams. Parents enjoyed the last moments of rest. The village seemed peaceful beyond measure. This transition between night and morning may have been one of the most beautiful parts of life beside the Nile. The coolness remained. The stars lingered overhead. The promise of a new day approached slowly. People who rose early often witnessed scenes few others saw. Palm trees standing dark against brightening skies. Birds crossing the horizon. Mist drifting above irrigation canals. The river shining softly beneath the first light. These quiet sights offered a different kind of relaxation. Not the comfort of evening after work, but the calm that exists before work begins. A brief gift of stillness. The ancient Egyptians lived close to these moments. Their lives followed the sun. They noticed dawn. They noticed sunset. They noticed the changing moods of the river and sky. Nature was not something distant from daily life. It surrounded them constantly. And because of that, relaxation often came from simply observing it. Watching light change. Feeling the breeze. Listening to water. Looking at stars. Sitting quietly beside loved ones. These experiences required no wealth. No special preparation. No grand celebration. They were available to ordinary people living ordinary lives. As the dawn grew brighter, the first signs of activity finally appeared. A door opened. Someone stepped outside. A bird called from a nearby tree. The village began waking. Yet the memory of the peaceful night remained. The cool air. The stories. The shared meal. The quiet conversations. The stars above the Nile. Soon, after another long day beneath the Egyptian sun, those comforts would return once again. And when evening arrived, families would gather as they always had. The river would flow beside them. The stars would emerge overhead. And the ancient world would gently settle back into the calm rhythm of rest. The dawn continued spreading across the Nile Valley. What had been silver and gray slowly became pale gold. The outlines of palm trees grew sharper. Mudbrick homes emerged from the shadows. The river reflected the growing light in long shimmering ribbons that drifted gently downstream. One by one, people began waking. Not all at once. The ancient world rarely moved suddenly. Instead, life returned gradually. A farmer sat up on his sleeping mat and stretched his tired arms. Nearby, other family members remained asleep for a few moments longer. The coolness of the night still lingered in the air, and many people enjoyed those final peaceful moments before beginning another day. The village was awakening. A door opened somewhere nearby. A woman stepped outside carrying a clay jar. A rooster called in the distance. Birds moved among the palm leaves. Small sounds appeared one after another, like tiny ripples spreading across still water. Yet despite these signs of activity, the atmosphere remained calm. The rush of midday was still far away. For now, the Nile Valley belonged to the early morning. This was a time many Egyptians appreciated. The air felt fresh. The sunlight was gentle. The heavy heat had not yet arrived. Workers could move comfortably. Farmers heading toward the fields often enjoyed these cooler hours. Their sandals pressed into familiar paths worn smooth by generations of footsteps. Irrigation channels reflected the morning sky. Dew clung to plants growing near the river. The land itself seemed rested, refreshed after a night of darkness. The evening relaxation of the previous day had given way to sleep, and sleep had prepared people for the work ahead. This cycle repeated endlessly. Work. Rest. Sleep. Work again. Simple. Reliable. Steady. The rhythm shaped every aspect of life. Along the riverbanks, fishermen untied their boats. Wood creaked softly. Ropes loosened. Paddles dipped into calm water. The river welcomed them once more. For many fishermen, the Nile was more than a workplace. It was a companion present throughout their lives. They knew its sounds. They knew its moods. They knew the feeling of evening breezes moving across its surface after sunset. And they knew the peace that came from sitting beside it at the end of a long day. As the morning brightened, village streets slowly filled with movement. Children carried water. Adults prepared tools. Cooking fires were lit. Thin streams of smoke rose into the clear sky. The smell of bread began drifting through the air. Life resumed. Yet even while working, people understood that another evening waited beyond the horizon. The cool hours would return. The stars would return. The comfort of family gatherings would return. There was reassurance in knowing that, no matter how demanding the day became, the night would eventually arrive. And with it would come rest. As the sun climbed higher, the memory of the cool night slowly faded. Warmth spread across the fields. Shadows shortened. The bright Egyptian sky stretched endlessly overhead. Work filled the hours. In the fields, farmers tended crops nourished by the Nile. Some repaired irrigation channels. Others carried baskets filled with produce. Their movements were steady and practiced. Years of experience guided every task. Nearby, craftsmen opened workshops. Potters shaped clay into jars and bowls. Carpenters worked with wood brought from distant regions. Weavers transformed fibers into cloth. Stoneworkers carefully shaped materials needed for buildings and monuments. Each occupation demanded patience. Each required skill. And each left workers tired by the end of the day. This exhaustion made evening relaxation especially valuable. The harder the labor, the sweeter the rest. A worker carrying heavy loads beneath the sun could appreciate a cool breeze more deeply than someone who had never experienced such effort. A person standing for hours welcomed the chance to sit. A person exposed to heat welcomed the comfort of shade. The contrast mattered. Without the challenges of the day, the pleasures of the evening might not have felt so meaningful. As morning became afternoon, the sun grew stronger. Dust rose from roads and pathways. Animals sought shade. People moved more slowly whenever possible. The Nile continued flowing quietly beside them all. Its presence influenced nearly everything. The river brought life to crops. It supplied fish. It provided transportation. And after sunset, it often provided one of the most pleasant places to relax. Many Egyptians likely spent portions of their evenings near the water simply because it felt comfortable there. The air was cooler. The scenery was calming. The sounds were soothing. There was no need for elaborate entertainment. The river itself offered enough. Imagine a merchant working through a busy day in a riverside town. Customers arrive. Goods are unloaded. Records are kept. Conversations continue hour after hour. By late afternoon, fatigue settles into his shoulders. The noise of the marketplace feels heavier than it did earlier. The sunlight seems brighter. The day feels longer. Then eventually the shadows begin lengthening. The market starts to quiet. The sun lowers toward the horizon. Relief approaches. The merchant knows exactly what awaits. A meal. Family. Cool air. The familiar comfort of another Egyptian evening. This expectation likely carried many people through difficult days. They knew rest was coming. They knew the rhythm would continue. The world around them reinforced that certainty. The sun rose. The sun set. The Nile flowed. The stars appeared. The cycle never stopped. And because it never stopped, people could trust it. By late afternoon, the quality of light began changing once again. The harsh brightness of midday softened little by little. Golden tones appeared across the landscape. Palm trees cast longer shadows. The river reflected warm colors instead of brilliant white sunlight. Workers noticed these changes immediately. They had spent their entire lives observing them. The approach of evening was more than a visual transformation. It was a physical feeling. The air cooled slightly. The pressure of the heat eased. Breathing felt easier. Energy returned. A farmer working near an irrigation canal paused briefly and looked toward the west. The sun was descending. Not quickly, but steadily. The most difficult part of the day was nearly over. Nearby, other workers reached similar conclusions. Tasks were completed. Tools were gathered. Animals were prepared for the journey home. The entire landscape seemed to be preparing for evening. In villages across Egypt, cooking preparations began. Grain was ground. Dough was mixed. Vegetables were prepared. Fires were lit. The familiar sense of supper gradually spread through the air. Children sensed the transition too. The cooler temperatures invited outdoor activity. Voices filled courtyards. Neighbors greeted one another. Families reunited after spending much of the day focused on separate responsibilities. The return home carried emotional comfort. People belonged to their households, their families, their communities. Evening brought those connections back together. As the sunlight continued fading, the Nile became increasingly beautiful. Its surface glowed with reflected gold. Small boats crossed slowly through the light. Reeds along the shoreline swayed gently. The entire river seemed calmer somehow, even though its steady flow never changed. Many people paused to appreciate these moments. Perhaps not deliberately. Perhaps only for a few seconds. Yet they noticed. The beauty of evening could not be ignored completely. After long hours of labor, the changing sky offered a quiet reward. No payment was required. No preparation was necessary. One simply looked up. And there it was. The colors of sunset spreading across ancient Egypt. As shadows stretched farther across fields and villages, a feeling of anticipation grew. The evening was returning. Soon lamps would glow. Meals would be shared. Stories would be told. Children would grow sleepy. The stars would emerge above the Nile. And once again, the ancient world would settle into the gentle, comforting rhythm that generations had known before. A rhythm of family. A rhythm of rest. A rhythm of calm evenings beside the eternal river. The sun drifted lower and lower toward the western edge of the world. Its light no longer felt harsh. Instead, it spread across the Nile Valley like a soft golden blanket. The fields glowed warmly. Mud brick walls reflected shades of amber and copper. Palm trees cast long shadows that stretched across pathways and courtyards. Throughout the villages, people sensed the change. Even without looking at the sky, they could feel evening approaching. The air had become gentler. The heat no longer pressed so heavily upon the land. A breeze moved across the river and wandered through the settlements, carrying with it the scent of water, earth, and growing plants. Workers began their journeys home. A farmer balanced tools across his shoulder and followed a familiar path beside irrigation channels. A fisherman secured his final catch and prepared to leave the riverbank. A potter brushed clay from his hands before closing his workshop. The day was ending. And with that ending came a sense of relief that was deeply familiar. The Nile itself seemed to welcome the evening. The water reflected the changing colors of the sky. Gold became orange. Orange softened into shades of rose and purple. The river carried these colors downstream, breaking them apart and stitching them together again with every small wave. For a few quiet moments, the entire landscape appeared transformed. Children noticed it too. Many had spent the day helping their families. Some carried water. Others cared for animals or assisted with household chores. Even their smaller responsibilities could be tiring. Now they gathered near homes and courtyards, enjoying the cooler air. Their voices rose and fell gently. Parents watched nearby. No one seemed eager to hurry indoors. After the heat of the afternoon, the evening felt too pleasant to waste. Across Egypt, thousands of similar scenes unfolded. Not grand events. Not moments recorded by scribes. Simply ordinary people welcoming the end of another day. And yet these ordinary moments formed the heart of life. The comfort of returning home. The sight of loved ones. The smell of supper being prepared. The feeling of sandals finally leaving tired feet. These were the experiences people carried with them year after year. As the sun touched the horizon, birds crossed the sky in dark silhouettes. Their wings moved steadily against the fading light. For a brief moment, everything seemed peaceful beyond measure. The fields rested. The river shimmered. The villages glowed softly beneath the evening sky. And the ancient world prepared itself for another calm night beside the Nile. As darkness slowly arrived, lamps began appearing one by one. A small flame flickered inside a mud brick home. Another glowed within a courtyard. Then another. Soon tiny points of warm light were scattered throughout the village. The darkness did not feel frightening. It felt welcoming. The arrival of night signaled the arrival of rest. Families gathered around simple meals. Bread was shared. Vegetables were passed from hand to hand. Fish caught earlier in the day might appear on the table if fortune had been kind. Conversations unfolded naturally. No one needed a special reason to talk. The day itself provided enough stories. A repaired irrigation channel. A successful catch. A neighbor's news. A child's small achievement. The topics were simple. Yet they mattered. The evening meal was often one of the few times when families could sit together without rushing. Work paused. Responsibilities loosened their hold. People could focus on one another. The lamplight danced gently against walls. Shadows shifted as flames moved. The atmosphere felt warm despite the growing coolness outside. Nearby, an elderly grandfather shared memories from his younger years. Perhaps he described a particularly large flood of the Nile. Perhaps he remembered seasons of abundance. Perhaps he recalled people who were no longer living. The children listened quietly. The adults smiled. Such conversations connected generations. The evening made room for them. Elsewhere in the village, neighbors gathered outside. Some sat on low stools. Others rested directly on woven mats. The cool air encouraged people to remain outdoors. Voices drifted through the darkness. Laughter appeared occasionally, though never loudly enough to disturb the calm. The pace remained slow. The night seemed to encourage gentleness. Along the riverbank, a few people lingered after supper. The Nile was beautiful at night. Moonlight shimmered across the water. Reeds rustled softly. Fish occasionally disturbed the surface with quiet splashes. The river offered a different kind of companionship after sunset. It asked nothing. It demanded nothing. It simply flowed. Many Egyptians likely found comfort in that constancy. The river was always there. Through good years and difficult years. Through childhood and old age. Through seasons of prosperity and seasons of challenge. The Nile remained. Watching it at night may have provided a sense of stability difficult to describe. The same waterway that supported life during the day now offered peace during the evening. As the stars appeared overhead, conversation slowed. People leaned back and looked upward. The sky seemed endless. The stars seemed countless. And beneath them, the villages of Egypt settled deeper into the night. The evening continued unfolding with quiet patience. No bells marked the passing hours. No clocks measured the time. Instead, people noticed the movement of the moon and stars. They observed the cooling air. They felt sleepiness slowly arriving. The night guided them naturally. On one rooftop, a family sat together beneath the open sky. A child pointed upward at a bright star. An older relative answered a question softly. The conversation drifted from one topic to another before eventually fading into comfortable silence. Silence was not something ancient Egyptians necessarily avoided. Many evenings likely included long stretches where people simply sat together. Listening. Thinking. Watching the sky. The day's labor often left little energy for endless talking. And that was perfectly acceptable. Companionship did not always require words. Nearby, a woman finished weaving a small item she had worked on during the evening. The repetitive movement of her hands felt almost restful. Now she set the work aside. Tomorrow would bring more opportunities to continue. There was no need to hurry. The night belonged to slowing down. In wealthier homes, musicians occasionally played soft melodies after supper. The sound of a harp drifted through a courtyard. A flute answered gently. The music blended with the evening breeze. It was not performed for excitement. It was performed for atmosphere. For comfort. For relaxation. Even those who could not afford musicians often experienced music in simpler ways. Family members sang familiar songs. Neighbors shared melodies learned long ago. The human voice carried beautifully through cool night air. The sounds traveled across rooftops and narrow streets before fading into the darkness. As the hours passed, the village grew quieter. Children became sleepy. Some rested their heads on parents' shoulders. Others had already fallen asleep where they sat. Adults smiled and carried them to sleeping places. The transition felt natural. No one resisted it for long. The body knew what it needed. Rest. Recovery. Sleep. The stars climbed higher. The moon crossed the sky. The river continued its steady movement beside the sleeping land. And throughout ancient Egypt, countless families experienced similar evenings. Different homes. Different lives. Different challenges. Yet the same comforting pattern connected them all. The workday ended. The heat faded. Food was shared. Stories were told. The cool breeze arrived. The stars appeared. Then, little by little, sleep drew near. It happened so gently that many people hardly noticed the exact moment. One thought faded into another. One conversation ended. Eyes grew heavy. The sounds of the night became distant. And beneath the vast sky above the Nile, another generation of ancient Egyptians drifted peacefully toward rest, wrapped in the familiar comfort of evening after a long day beneath the desert sun. The village grew quieter with each passing moment. One by one, the last conversations faded into the darkness. Lamps burned lower. The small flames that had illuminated homes and courtyards throughout the evening now flickered softly, their light growing weaker as oil was carefully conserved. The night felt settled. The day's work was truly finished. Across rooftops and courtyards, families prepared for sleep. A father rolled out woven mats. A mother adjusted bedding for her children. An elderly relative found a familiar place near a wall where the breeze passed comfortably during the night. These routines had been repeated countless times before. There was comfort in their familiarity. No one needed instructions. No one needed reminders. The body and mind understood the rhythm. Evening naturally became night. Night naturally became sleep. Above the village, the stars appeared brighter than ever. The moon had moved farther across the sky, leaving some areas darker and others bathed in pale silver light. The rooftops of mud-brick homes glowed softly beneath it. Palm trees stood like quiet guardians over the sleeping settlement. The Nile reflected fragments of moonlight between patches of darkness. The river seemed endless. A steady companion moving through every hour of the night. Somewhere near the edge of the village, a fisherman sat alone for a few moments before sleep. His family had already settled down. The evening meal was long finished. The stories had ended. The children were asleep. Now he simply watched the river. The water moved silently through the darkness. A cool breeze touched his face. The stars reflected faintly on the surface. There was nothing left to accomplish today. Nothing left to repair. Nothing left to carry. Nothing left to worry about. The simple act of sitting quietly felt like enough. Perhaps this was one of the deepest forms of relaxation available in ancient Egypt. Not entertainment. Not celebration. Just stillness. The opportunity to pause completely after a demanding day. Eventually, even he rose and returned home. The village became quieter still. The final footsteps disappeared. Only the sounds of nature remained. The soft rustling of reeds. The whisper of wind. The distant movement of water. And over all of it, the immense silence of the desert night. Hours passed unnoticed. The deepest part of the night wrapped itself around the Nile Valley. Most people slept soundly now. The exhaustion of daily labor made sleep come easily. Farmers who had spent hours beneath the sun rested deeply. Builders recovered tired muscles. Craftsmen relaxed hands that had worked steadily throughout the day. Mothers who had cared for households and children finally enjoyed uninterrupted rest. Even the animals seemed peaceful. Donkeys stood quietly. Goats settled together. Birds rested among palm branches. The entire landscape appeared suspended in calm. If someone had traveled through Egypt during these hours, they would have encountered a world very different from the busy scenes often described in history. There would be no crowded markets, no noisy workshops, no bustling river traffic. Instead, they would find silence. A silence broken only by gentle natural sounds. This quieter side of ancient Egypt rarely appears in monuments or official records. Yet it was experienced every single day by ordinary people. Most lives were not spent in temples or palaces. Most lives unfolded in villages, homes, fields, and workshops. And every one of those lives required rest. The night provided that gift. Moonlight drifted across irrigation canals. The water within them reflected the stars. Rows of crops stood motionless. The same fields that demanded so much labor during daylight now appeared completely peaceful. A farmer sleeping nearby could not see them. But tomorrow he would return. The cycle would begin again. And because of that certainty, there was no need to think about work tonight. The fields could wait. The river could wait. Morning could wait. For now there was only sleep. Nearby, a family rested together on a rooftop. The youngest child had fallen asleep while listening to a story earlier in the evening. An older brother slept nearby. Parents rested a short distance away. The arrangement was simple. Yet there was comfort in being close to one another. Ancient Egyptian homes often brought families together in ways that encouraged connection. Daily life was shared. Work was shared. Meals were shared. Even sleep was often shared within common spaces. The bonds created by this closeness likely shaped the atmosphere of evening life. The night was not faced alone. People entered it surrounded by familiar voices and familiar faces. And that companionship offered its own kind of peace. As the stars continued their slow journey overhead, the Nile flowed onward through the darkness. Patient. Steady. Unchanging. The river had watched generations come and go. It had carried countless boats. It had nourished countless harvests. And tonight, as on every other night, it quietly accompanied the sleeping land. Far above the river valley, the stars filled nearly every part of the sky. Without bright artificial lights, ancient Egyptians could see details that many people today rarely notice. The heavens stretched from horizon to horizon. Dense clusters of stars glowed softly. Faint bands of light crossed the darkness. The sky itself seemed alive. For people sleeping outdoors, this view was an ordinary part of life. Children grew up beneath it. Adults worked beneath it. Elders spent their final years beneath it. The stars became lifelong companions. Many Egyptians associated certain stars with religious beliefs and seasonal changes. Yet even beyond those meanings, the night sky carried a simple beauty. A person did not need special knowledge to appreciate it. One only needed to look upward. Imagine a quiet rooftop near the Nile. A family sleeps peacefully. The evening breeze moves through nearby palms. The scent of earth and water drifts through the air. Above, thousands of stars shine steadily. The scene is so calm that time itself seems slower. Moments like this occurred every night across the Nile Valley. Most passed without notice. No one recorded them. No one celebrated them. Yet they formed the background of daily existence. The ordinary beauty of ancient life. The comfort found between one day's labor and the next. For many workers, relaxation after sunset was not a luxury. It was a necessity. Without those quiet hours, the demands of daily life would have felt much heavier. Evening offered recovery. A chance to sit. A chance to talk. A chance to eat slowly. a chance to feel the coolness return after enduring intense heat. These experiences renewed both body and spirit. The ancient Egyptians understood this naturally. Their routines reflected it. Work filled the daylight. Rest filled the evening. Sleep filled the night. Balance emerged from the repetition. Year after year. Season after season. The pattern endured. As midnight slowly gave way to the later hours of darkness, the village remained peaceful. The moonlight softened. The breeze continued. The river flowed. And the people slept deeply beneath the protective blanket of the ancient Egyptian night. Eventually, the moon began moving toward the western horizon. Its light changed subtly. Shadows shifted across rooftops and courtyards. The air felt slightly cooler than before. The deepest darkness had passed. Though dawn was still distant, the night was quietly moving forward. A few people stirred in their sleep. Someone turned over on a woven mat. A child adjusted a blanket. A dog briefly lifted its head before settling down again. These small movements barely disturbed the silence. The village remained wrapped in calm. Near the river, mist began gathering above the water. Thin ribbons drifted across the surface. Moonlight touched them softly, turning them pale and silver. The scene appeared almost unreal. Yet for the people sleeping nearby, it was simply another ordinary night beside the Nile. Nature often created beauty without announcement. The Egyptians lived close enough to notice it. A farmer waking briefly before dawn might see mist hovering above fields. A fisherman heading toward the river early in the morning might watch moonlight shimmer on calm water. A child sleeping on a rooftop might open sleepy eyes and glimpse a sky filled with stars. These moments required nothing. No money. No preparation. No special status. They belonged to everyone. Perhaps this was one reason evenings and nights felt so relaxing. The world itself contributed to the experience. The cooling air. The changing light. The sounds of the river. The vast sky overhead. Together they created an atmosphere that encouraged calm. As the hours continued passing, the village remained asleep. Tomorrow's work had not yet arrived. The fields were quiet. The workshops were quiet. The marketplaces were quiet. For a little while longer, the entire Nile Valley belonged to rest. And beneath the endless stars, ancient Egypt continued sleeping peacefully beside its eternal river. The night carried on with remarkable gentleness. Nothing in the Nile Valley seemed eager to move quickly. The river flowed at its own patient pace. The breeze wandered slowly through palm groves. Even the shadows appeared to drift across the landscape without urgency. Most of the village remained asleep. The roofs that had been filled with quiet conversation earlier in the evening were now silent. Families rested side by side beneath the open sky. Children dreamed peacefully. Parents recovered from another demanding day. Elderly relatives slept lightly, occasionally waking for a moment before returning to rest. The coolness of the night had settled fully across the land. Mudbrick walls, which had absorbed so much heat during the afternoon, now felt comfortable to the touch. The stone pathways running through the village no longer radiated warmth. Even the earth itself seemed relieved to escape the grip of the sun. Far beyond the fields, the desert stretched endlessly beneath the stars. During the day it could appear harsh and bright. Heat shimmered above the sand. Distant hills seemed to waver in the sunlight. But at night, the desert became something entirely different. It grew quiet, still, almost peaceful. The same moonlight that illuminated the Nile also touched the dunes and rocky plains beyond the fertile valley. The contrast between river and desert softened in the darkness. Everything appeared connected beneath the vast sky. A shepherd sleeping near a small group of animals stirred briefly. He opened his eyes and listened. For a moment he heard nothing except the wind. The silence felt complete. Then he settled once more into sleep. Across ancient Egypt, countless people experienced similar moments. Brief awakenings. A glance at the stars. A cool breeze against the face. The distant sound of water. Then sleep again. These small experiences were woven naturally into life. No one considered them remarkable. Yet they contributed to the deep sense of peace that evening and night could bring. The Nile Valley may have been a place of hard labor, but it also offered these quiet rewards. The reward of rest. The reward of stillness. The reward of feeling that, for a few hours, nothing more was required. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the stars continued their journey across the heavens. Ancient Egyptians observed these movements closely. The night sky was more than a source of beauty. It helped people understand the passage of time. It marked seasons. It guided travelers. It connected daily life to something larger than themselves. Yet on quiet nights, the stars could simply be enjoyed. A child lying on a rooftop might trace patterns between them. An elderly grandparent might remember stories connected to particular constellations. A fisherman resting after a long day might look upward without thinking of anything at all. The stars welcomed all of these experiences. They asked for nothing. They simply shone. Below them, the Nile moved steadily through the darkness. The river had been flowing long before any of the sleeping villagers were born. It would continue flowing long after they were gone. Perhaps there was comfort in that thought. Life could be difficult. Harvests were uncertain. Illness sometimes appeared unexpectedly. Floods varied from year to year. Yet some things endured. The river endured. The stars endured. The cycle of day and night endured. These constants provided a quiet sense of stability. A farmer who worried about crops could still trust the sunrise. A fisherman uncertain about tomorrow's catch could still trust the river to be there. The world contained uncertainty, but it also contained reliable rhythms. Evening relaxation emerged naturally from those rhythms. People did not need to create special opportunities for rest. The setting sun created them. Darkness encouraged them. Cool air welcomed them. The environment itself invited people to slow down. Throughout the villages, sleeping families remained wrapped in calm. A child turned over on a woven mat. A parent adjusted a blanket. Someone murmured briefly in a dream. Then silence returned. The sounds were small. Comforting. Evidence that life continued peacefully around them. Near one home, an oil lamp that had burned through much of the evening finally went out. The last faint glow disappeared. The darkness deepened. Yet no one noticed. Everyone was asleep. And above them all, the stars continued watching over the Nile Valley. As the night moved closer to dawn, a subtle change began spreading through the landscape. The air felt slightly different. Fresher. Cooler. More delicate. The deepest hours of darkness were passing. Though the sky remained filled with stars, morning had quietly begun its approach. The first signs were easy to miss. A distant bird shifted among the reeds. The breeze changed direction slightly. Mist gathered more noticeably above certain stretches of water. Nature sensed the coming sunrise long before most people did. The villages remained silent. Yet the world beyond them was already preparing. Along the riverbank, a heron stood motionless in shallow water. Its reflection stretched across the surface. Nearby, fish moved beneath the current. Reeds swayed gently. The Nile seemed awake even while the people slept. The river possessed its own rhythm, one that continued regardless of human schedules. For generations, Egyptians had lived alongside this rhythm. They learned to trust it, to follow it, to build their lives around it. And after every day of labor, the river rewarded them with moments of calm. Many evening gatherings naturally formed near the water. The cooler temperatures made the riverbank inviting. The scenery encouraged relaxation. The sounds soothed tired minds. A person sitting beside the Nile at sunset needed very little else. The river itself provided enough. As dawn crept closer, the moon moved lower toward the horizon. Its light softened. Shadows grew less distinct. The stars nearest the eastern sky began fading ever so slightly. The change happened slowly. So slowly that no sleeping person would notice. Yet it was happening. Night was gently surrendering its place to morning. The sleeping village knew nothing of it. Families remained wrapped in dreams. Children rested peacefully. Parents recovered strength for another day. The entire community floated within those final precious hours of rest. Hours that often felt deeper and more refreshing than any others. The coolness had reached its peak. The noise of daytime remained far away. For a little while longer, Egypt belonged entirely to sleep. The eastern horizon gradually softened. What had been deep black became dark blue. Then a faint gray appeared. The transformation was subtle. A person would need patience to notice it. But ancient Egypt was a place that understood patience. The Nile taught patience. Agriculture taught patience. Life itself taught patience. Nothing important happened instantly. Crops required time. Children required time. Buildings required time. Even dawn required time. The first people to wake were often those whose work depended on the cool morning hours. A baker opened sleepy eyes and listened to the silence around him. For a few moments he remained still. The stars were still visible. The air felt fresh. The world seemed peaceful beyond measure. Soon he would begin his tasks. Ovens would need attention. Dough would need preparation. The village would depend on his work. But not yet. For now, he simply enjoyed the quiet. Nearby, another early riser stepped onto a rooftop and looked toward the river. Mist hovered above the water. Palm trees appeared as dark silhouettes against the brightening horizon. Birds called occasionally from hidden branches. The scene felt calm enough to last forever. Of course, it would not. The day would come. Work would return. The sun would climb higher. Markets would open. Tools would be lifted. Fields would fill with activity. But before all of that happened, there remained this peaceful moment. A gift between night and morning. A final chapter in the story of rest. Many Egyptians likely treasured these moments just as much as the evening itself. The world felt balanced. Neither fully asleep nor fully awake. Neither dark nor bright. Simply quiet. Simply calm. Across the village, a few more people stirred. A door opened softly. Someone stepped outside carrying a water jar. A rooster called from somewhere in the distance. The sounds remained gentle. Nothing broke the peace. Instead, each sound blended naturally into the awakening landscape. The Nile reflected the growing light. The stars faded one by one. The sky brightened gradually. And another day prepared to begin. Yet even as morning approached, traces of the night remained. The cool air, the memory of evening conversations, the comfort of shared meals, the peaceful hours spent beneath the stars. These experiences lingered quietly within the people of ancient Egypt. They carried that calm into the new day, knowing that when the sun eventually set again, the river would still be there. The breeze would return. The stars would emerge. And another gentle evening of rest would unfold beside the timeless Nile. Now the dawn has fully arrived over the Nile. The first rays of sunlight touch the riverbanks. Palm trees glow softly in the morning light. The mist above the water slowly disappears, and the world begins to wake. A fisherman prepares his boat. A farmer walks toward the fields. A baker tends the morning fire. Children begin to stir from sleep. Another ordinary day in ancient Egypt quietly begins. Yet before we leave this distant world behind, let us remain here for just a few moments longer. Let us stand beside the Nile one final time. The river moves as it always has. Steady. Patient. Endless. Its waters glide past villages, fields, reeds, and palm groves. They carry reflections of the brightening sky and the memories of countless evenings that have come before. Throughout this long journey, we have followed ordinary people rather than kings. We have walked dusty paths beside tired farmers. We have sat quietly with fishermen after sunset. We have listened to family conversations beneath starlit skies. We have watched lamps flicker inside mud-brick homes. We have felt the cool evening breeze arrive after long hours of heat. And perhaps that is where the true heart of ancient Egypt lived. Not only in monuments of stone, not only in temples and palaces, but in simple evenings, in shared meals, in quiet stories, in the comfort of returning home after a day of labor. The sun rose. The sun set. The river flowed. The stars appeared. Again and again. Year after year. Generation after generation. These gentle rhythms shaped lives that are now long gone, yet somehow still feel familiar. As the morning grows brighter, the stars disappear from the sky. The rooftops empty. The courtyards become busy once more. Voices return to the village. Work begins. The peaceful night slowly becomes a memory. And now, as we quietly step away from the banks of the Nile, the ancient world begins to fade into the distance. The fishermen become smaller. The villages grow quiet. The river becomes a silver ribbon stretching across the desert. The sounds soften. The colors blur. Only calm remains. Far away, the Nile continues its endless journey. The breeze moves gently through the reeds. The palm trees sway beneath the morning sky. And somewhere in that distant ancient world, another evening will eventually come. Another family will gather. Another lamp will glow. Another story will be told beneath the stars. But for now, everything grows still. The river flows quietly. The wind whispers softly. The desert rests beneath the sun. And the peaceful world of ancient Egypt drifts slowly away, like a dream carried gently downstream upon the calm waters of the Nile. Rest now. The river is calm. The sky is bright. And all is quiet. Crescent moon sparkles.